Hey, Randolph.
Hey, cousin.
How you doing?
I'm all just like waiting, ready to go.
Look at you with your refreshments, knowing how to entertain the people.
Look, I had it. Yeah, I got the flowers and everything all set up, and had some last minute people registered this morning because I didn't close the registration. So, oh look, we have one person already.
Look at good. I had one question for you. Did you want me to do some live searches with people?
That would be, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yes.
Okay. So what I'll do is I will kind of go through the beginning kind of steps, try to get that done probably about 30-40 minutes, and then we can do the process of like I can show a few documents, and then I can go through the process of like searching, because what I find is that a lot of times people, like, you give them the information, and then when they actually like go out into the world and like try to go and search, they get like sort of paralyzed by that experience, and they're not quite sure how to navigate it. So I will pop open a few windows.
Cool. I had this lady called late yesterday, and she goes, yeah, I already know how to search for my family. And I go, oh, where's your family from? She's like, Pineville, Louisiana. And I'm
Repeats Parish.
Yeah.
Near Alexandria.
Yeah. And I was
right.
like, okay. She's like, yeah, do you know where that is? I had to pull it up on the map because I honestly.
Right, yeah, it's right near Alexandria. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
it's on the Delta, or closer to the Delta, like where, like our place is north and hers is like on the L shape. It's right where the ankle part sort of is. Right.
Okay, yeah. So we had a nice chat. So she was going to come in person. Edna is her name.
Miss Edna.
she
I can already tell who, because what young person do you know named Edna?
Okay. And so then she said, I don't know, I need to get out of the house. But then she changed her mind. So she's going to join on Zoom because her cousin called me. So they're both going to be on Zoom.
Okay.
And so, I think I told you the NAACP really pushed the flyer out throughout their membership through the Pomona Valley, San Gabriel area.
Okay. Okay.
So now I'm obligated to join that organization.
Look at you.
And I'm just like, dang, man.
It's like, I don't need any more. Listen, your haircut, baby, whoever got you edged up, they got you all the way together. It is tight.
Yeah, she hooked me up. Hi, Chester. Hello. Our president of the Friends of the Library just walked in. And hello.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So
everybody's all barefaced. I know, because there's no mask mandate anymore. I'm feeling a little nervous. And I'm not even there.
Have yours? You don't have yours. Oh, you do have yours. I know. I have about 5 of them in the car. They're like floating all over the place. So.
That's better.
Thank you. You have to remember, I'm down here and Typhoid Mary and Typhoid Marvin.
I had to represent. So I had to break out one of our family books. So I'll be I'll be pushing the family too. So
Right. Thank you.
I do, right behind you on the table.
Oh, I see. Okay.
No, I got a pen up here. Okay, I'm gonna find one.
Good morning.
Yeah,
You're unmasked now.
well, some people are unmasking because the mandate was lifted or whatever. My parents have their immune system is not so good, so I
Oh, I
can't.
get that. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go grab a
Okay,
pen.
no problem.
I thought I got one up
If
here.
you might have just ran away. Pens do that. Pens and socks.
Shoot. Okay, let me go find one. Okay, unless you're going crazy. Let me go grab it.
Crazy runs in the family.
Okay, good. All right.
All right.
Here you go. Here we go. Grab yours.
Hello, those of you who have joined on Zoom. Feel free to use your video if you want to, because I like to see people and talk to them who are here.
We're just sitting over there.
Here.
We've got a hybrid audience today. We've got some people in person who are getting all the snacks that those of us who are virtual are not getting. They're getting all the snacks and we are not getting any of the snacks, just so you know. So maybe you should go and get some snacks if you have some at home, if you don't already have them, or your coffee or any of your other stuff. We'll wait for Tracy to come on back. I see her. I can always pick her out. Okay, Trace, there are about 7 people who are virtual, so make sure you put that on your list.
Oh, yes, I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
So we just opened, so people are grab some snacks, please. So I don't have to.
Right. I was about to say, just so you all know, Tracy is my cousin, and one of the hallmarks of the Atlas family is food. So yeah, it's food and funerals. Especially when there is no food at a funeral, that's a problem. So yeah, this is a central part. I'm not surprised that she has a table full of snacks because this is what our family does. It's hilarious, but it's totally on brand.
Cousin or play cousin?
Cousin, who's a cousin of your cousin?
I said cousin or play cousin. This is Lynette.
Oh, hey, Lynette. Yeah, no, she's a real cousin. She's real.
Yes, I know Bruce. So Bruce is my and my grandmother was an Alice. And so
yes, Tracy's explaining to everyone in the room how we're related. I love how she's like, Nicka, take it away. I heard it in her voice. So Tracy's grandmother and my grandmother. Yes. Hey, how are you?
All right.
Oh, Arthur. Right, now I know what that is. Okay. I know. Oh, that's awesome. So right. So those of you who are on the fact that I know who it is. So for those of you who are virtual, that's another cousin. He drove from Carson to Upland to come hear this. That's so awesome. Look at my family coming through, participating in the room. And I don't see anyone virtually, but that's okay. But there's a couple of them in the room. So you take it away, Trace. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, well, we'll just go ahead and start, and I'm sure some people will be trickling in. I see somebody else coming. So good morning, everybody. I'm Tracy Randall. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Upland Library. And I have been working really hard for probably several years to get this program because I came from another library. And so with the support of the Friends of the Library is why we're able to have this program today. Our president and secretary for the Friends are here and a member. So thank you, Friends of the Library, for supporting this event. So as Nicka just mentioned, she is my 4th cousin. And because of her, I didn't have to do a lot of research because she had already done all the research that I didn't need to do. So I'm just going to share with you a brief biography because she's like the total rock star. I mean, anybody in genealogy world knows her. You just have to mention her first name. You don't need to go any further because they know who I'm talking about. So Nicka is a professional photographer, speaker, host, consultant, and documentarian with more than 20 years of experience as a genealogist. She has extensive experience in African ancestral genealogy, reverse genealogy, and is an expert in genealogical research in the northeastern Louisiana area and researching enslaved communities. She has a diverse and varied experience in media with a background in audio, video, and written communications. She's appeared on the Today Show, CNN, MSNBC, and on the series Who Do You Think You Are, and has been interviewed by the Oakland Tribune, The Undefeated, National Geographic, and Time Magazine. She's the host of Black Pro Gen Live, an innovative web show with more than 125 episodes focused on people of color, genealogy, and family history. So recently, she was able to become a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, a member of 2 lineages societies, Sons and Daughters of the Middle Passage, the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution, and past board member of the California Genealogical Society and the African American Genealogical Society of Northern California. So Nicka is also our family historian. As I mentioned, she's my cousin. She's the head researcher of the Atlas family of Lake Providence, Louisiana in East Carroll Parish. She guides and coaches an active group of family historians at the Who is Nicka Smith Patreon community. Tomorrow, which she just announced this week, if you go to the History Channel, Nicka will be featured on the documentary about President Lincoln. So that is tomorrow on the History Channel. What time is that, Nicka?
It's it's 7. Well, you know, now that I'm still a Yankee in the South, I have to get used to things starting at Central. It's 7 Central, not 8, because you know when you're in California, it always starts at 8. So it should be 8. It's 8 Pacific, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, and it's commercial spots within the documentary. So it's 3 nights. It starts tomorrow, so it's Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And then I just found out that they're also airing the spots during the Black Patriots. They're re-showing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's documentary on Black Patriots and the American Revolution. So they're also airing that later on tomorrow. I think Monday night they're airing it again.
Awesome. So I'm really happy to have Nicka, be here. She is in Tennessee. So it's almost lunchtime back there. We have a farmer's market on Saturdays, and so we may have people trickling in finding parking. But I'm glad that you're all here this morning. So we're hoping after this event, if anyone is interested in just a casual genealogy group, we're going to be starting that. And we do have new resources here at the library that you can access from home. Heritage Quest, Fold 3, which is a military genealogy site, and newspapers.com. We do have access to the library edition of Ancestry, but you do need to use that in the library. But those are really great resources that are available to you if you don't want to fork over the money to subscribe to them. So I'm going to let Nicka take it away, and welcome Nicka and all of our people who are joining us on Zoom. We will have time for a Q&A before Nicka ends. And oh wait, before she starts, I'm going to share with you really quick. Hey, this is a labor of love. Nicka is like the editor of this, and we all contribute. So this is the Atlas Family History book, and Nicka puts this together. We have a family reunion coming up in July this year in New Orleans. So this has 8 generations, 7.
Yes, 9.
9 that are all in this book, including my family line. And it's just really interesting just to see where our family began. And I'm sure Nicka will probably share some of that with you too. She tells the story better than I do. So, but I'm happy to be in Atlas, and I'm happy you're all here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we got to give some love to the virtual people. I'm going to sort of romper room it. Hello, Jeffrey, Lene, Kim, Christine, Lorene, E, Courtney, Sharon, Aaron, and Liana. If I said it wrong, Liana, I am so sorry because everyone calls me Nicka, but it's Nicka. So I get it. All right. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the basics of genealogy. I think one of the things that folks think when you start researching Black families is that you have to recreate the will or there's some sort of special process that Black people need. And that actually is not the case. If you have the basics of genealogy down and you're doing it in the fashion in which you technically should, you have all of the tools that you need to do, searches on African American people, African American ancestors. The thing is that you have to pivot once you get to a certain time period, and that is determined upon whether or not people were enslaved or whether or not they were free. One of the most unknown, or really one of the most not well-known facts is that 10% of the population of Black people who were living in the United States before the Civil War were free. So if you have 4 million enslaved people in 1860, that means that almost 500,000 Black people within the United States at that time were free. So sometimes what happens is I'll work with folks and they'll be on this trail trying to locate their enslaved ancestors, and I can't find them, and I can't find them, and I tried everything. And then I'll say, did you check the 1860 census? And they'll say, well, why would I search that? Because that's only for free people. And I'll say, because there's free people of color on it, and they'll find their ancestors on it. So don't assume everyone was enslaved. Also, don't assume that people weren't manumitted, meaning they weren't freed and they lived in the Deep South, because there were scores of communities that people did that as well. So again, the basics are the same. It's just you have to pivot when you get to certain time spans. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the first 30 or 40 minutes going over the basics of genealogy. I don't talk to paint on the wall. So I want to hear from the people in the room who were there. And I also want to hear from the people who are on Zoom. Questions, comments, whatever you have, bring them up. Whenever I hear people present, I will think of a question. And if I don't ask it right then, I will forget. And then I'll be sitting at the end when it's time for questions, trying to remember what I was going to ask. So stop me because I'm that person that needs the people to stop, or for me to be able to ask questions. Tracy, can you, let's see, I think you're right outside the room. You need to enable giving me the ability to screen share, Trace. And if not, I see Arthur Rosby being an Atlas, doing what he does. This is what we all do. I know you don't want to touch your computer. Right. I'm like, I know he doesn't want to touch your computer.
She's on the phone.
Okay. Well, I can't share until she comes, but
Sorry.
sorry, you have to enable me to share, sweetie.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Let's see. Where do I go? Do I just go to share screen?
Go to share screen. There's a little caret to the right, and then it'll give you the option to give all participants, or even if you make me a co-host, then that way it'll block people from coming in trying to do crazy stuff on Zoom.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh no, I don't want to just do only host, right?
Right. No, wait. So actually, go to participants, click participants, and then hover over my name. And you see where it says more, make co-host. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. We got it ready. You're good to go. Go make your call. Bye. Right. She has stuff. I already know. Yeah, I already know. She does a lot. So that's why I was like, hey, let her go. All right. So let's jump on in. We're going to talk about the basics of family history research. Okay. We're going to talk about definitions to start. Number one, what is genealogy? Of course, it's an ology, which means it's the study of. Whenever you see an ology, A-L or O-L-O-G-Y, it's a study of something. It is lineage focused, meaning the begotten, right? It's the study of family pedigrees, an account of the descent of a person, family, or a group from an ancestor or older forms. The way that I talk about genealogy in particular is that it's the facts, right? It's you know, so-and-so was born March 3rd, 1895. Their name, they died in Memphis, Tennessee on October 14th, 1991. It's all of the facts, right? It's the actual trees, it's the great-great-grandparents, it's all of those things that give us a timeline as to where people existed, where they maybe touched down, where they operated, right? A lot of things can affect those dates and those locations. If someone was in the military, if they went away to college, and when you're talking about Black families, you're also talking about things like the Great Migration. That's how Arthur and Tracy are sitting in the same room at the same time right now. Our family is from Northeast Louisiana, okay? And they're from the literal most northeastern part of the state of Louisiana that you can get to, which is in East Carroll Parish and also West Carroll Parish. They used to be one parish or county. And Arkansas is directly north, and then Mississippi is directly east. And our family started migrating out of that area. Tracy's branch actually was the one that left first. And then after that, I would say it was kind of a sort of around the same time, maybe with Arthur's branch. And we all just end up moving out to the same spots. We just do. We always kind of orbit each other. And that's not unique for our family, especially when you're talking about migrations, right? Folks would go and set up shop. They'd go to places like Chicago, Gary, Detroit. One person would leave, they get a place, and other folks would start to leave. Maybe if they had a large family, they would leave the family behind in the homestead spot and then send for them later. And all of those things, right, when you're talking about a timeline, those are all central parts of doing family history research for anybody. But in particular, having timelines together and having those nuts and bolts facts is very important when you're researching anyone, but in particular, Black families. Now, where family history differs from genealogy is that family history is the study of past events related to a group of people who are related to each other, a person's children, or a group of related people, including people who lived in the past. And you saw, I just talked about the dates, right? We can take one of my uncle and Arthur and Tracy's cousin, King Atlas, for instance. He was born March 7th, 1895. And he was born in Louisiana, but as a result of him being enlisted and serving in World War I, he ends up in Chicago. I didn't say he lived in Chicago as of 1929. No, he got to Chicago as a result of his service in World War I. That's the family history aspect. Then he marries Aunt Helen in Chicago. Aunt Helen's family was from Indiana. How were they there? They were free people of color. They were from Kentucky. I didn't say Aunt Helen was just from Chicago. I added color to it. I added context. Family history is the why. It is literally the dash between the dates. Where genealogy is very facty, family history gives you all the context around those facts. And if you choose to just take family history away from genealogy, you miss so much of the context. You're missing things like, well, why, does every program in the Black community say that they could confess to hope in Christ at an early age on a funeral program, right? Like we just do that, right? Or even why certain songs are saying it's at funerals, or why is everyone in this cemetery, why does it look just like a person's neighborhood on the census? All the people buried around each other, it's like the neighborhood maps. All the streets of the roads are literally the way that people are buried. There's a reason why all of that stuff takes place. And when you don't get context, you're leaving the family history out and you're just focusing on facts. And some people do that. But for me, I find out that I learn more about myself, and I learn more about history, and I learn more about Black history when I look at things from a genealogy or genealogical and a family history perspective. All right, so this is step one, okay? To begin the process, you start with yourself. Don't ever, ever, ever in life I'm gonna make you all pinky promise right now that you are not going to start by trying to prove that you are related to Charlemagne. People do this all the time, okay? People will say, I'm related to Michael Jackson. And what you do when you start out on this quest to prove that you are related to Michael Jackson or Prince Rogers Nelson or whoever is you get confirmation bias. And you start looking for anything that will prove that story instead of you looking at your family's unique journey. So even down to, don't try to start out with, oh, well, we're Choctaw, or we're Chickasaw, or we're Muskogee Creek, or we're Cherokee, or you're trying to verify that you are Native American, do not start that as a part of your journey. Yes, that could be the reason why maybe you kind of got a kick in the butt to do it, but don't have that be the central part. Again, you get confirmation bias. You will start to not really truly evaluate the documents and the things that you are finding because you're only looking to validate that one story instead of you deciding to just look at everything more fully. Okay, so again, I cannot express that anymore. I tell you, I cannot believe there is a woman who's a part of the genealogy society that I'm part of in Oakland, California. And this woman was so dead set on proving that this man was her grandfather's dad. And all the evidence was saying that this man was not the Paul. But she just refused to see it. We're like, he's not even living in the same town. Like, you're asking questions that anybody would ask, but because she was so dead set on verifying this, she couldn't get out of her own way. So when you're starting with genealogy, start with yourself. What does that mean? You start from you and you document going back as far as you can, okay? And for some people, that may just be for parents. For other people who are adoptees, they don't even know beyond themselves. So for them, their first step might be doing a DNA test because especially if you are in an environment or a state where there are closed adoptions, you cannot get any more identifying information on your parents other than maybe physical characteristics and health history. So DNA tests are a way to go around that. But beyond that, if you know who your biological family is, you may not know beyond your grandparents. And so because of that, this is when you reach out to parents and relatives and fictive kin. What fictive kin is your mom's best friend, who is, you call Aunt Shirley, but Aunt Shirley isn't really your aunt. She's your grandmother's best friend and she's been around for everything. All the secret scandals and lies, Aunt Shirley knows it. She knows where all the bodies are buried. For some families, for individuals who are trying to validate or get information, going to someone outside of the family is more advantageous to talking to people inside of it because the folks inside of it may not want to spread somebody's business, right? Especially if it comes to parents, names, things like that, right? And so if I want to know something about the Rosbys, the number one person I call is Arthur's brother. He's on speed dial. Do you remember this person or that person or whatever? And he'll say, no, well, I don't know. And then he'll think back to different things. If I want to know something about what's going on Tracy's side of the family, Tracy will normally text me or tell me, or Arthur's brother actually will text me or he'll call me. We've built up a relationship over all these years where if someone dies, if someone is born, if someone graduates from college, if someone's in a show, we share all of that news. But we had to get to a point where we nurtured relationships to do that. And through reaching out and involving your family members, what you're doing is you're creating a project where everyone has a responsibility to it, that it's not just falling on your shoulders, that everyone sees the value. That book that's sitting there on the table, that is in the room, I would not have been able to put that together had I not had the assistance of other people as subject matter experts and really even to edit it. Tracy didn't even say, she helped me edit that. She got 30 pages, she edited it. There you go, that's how she got the copy of the book. So it's a team effort. All right, so beyond that, we're starting with ourselves, starting with what we know, going back as far as we can. We're reaching out to our parents, to relatives, and to fictive kin. The next step beyond that is gather. Get stuff from your house or the houses of relatives. Notice I didn't say go online and type a name on Ancestry and get lost because everyone in your family has the same name. Do you know how many Willie Mae Atlases there are in our family? 5. Do you know how many Barbara Atlases there are in our family? 5. My mom is one of them, right? So you don't want to start going online and searching until you're clear on who everyone is. Because especially in our families, we name people after people. Like we just do that. Like it's just a thing. And so you'll get confused, right? And so in order for you to kind of really stay clear on who is who, and before you start the search, you're getting documents. What are the documents? Marriage licenses, birth certificates, death certificates. I've talked about those funeral programs. Pretty much anything can be a genealogical source, honestly. I mean, you think about it. I'm sitting here at my desk. My birthday's in 2 weeks. I decided I wanted to gold belly me some banana pudding from Texas. So I have a receipt sitting on my desk for some banana pudding. So anyone that researches after me, they know on Thursday, February 17, 2022, 4 containers of banana pudding were delivered to my house. Now that sounds crazy, but think about it. How is this a genealogical source? Well, if they know my birthday's in 2 weeks, they can say, oh, maybe she ordered that for her birthday, right? They can say, well, wait a minute, what's birthday cake banana pudding taste like? And I'll tell you, it was good because I ate it last night. But there's also questions around, well, how does she do this? What's gold belly? You know, let's say this is detached. I don't have a card from the business or this really cute postcard from the service, right? But they just have a receipt. Then you can go off and research based off of this. There are so many things. Recently, I used an episode of The First 48 as a source. If you've ever watched the show on A&E, it's all about a police department trying to solve a murder within 48 hours of when it took place. Now, you are probably sitting here like, really use that as a source? Yes, I did, because a cousin on the opposite side of the family that I'm related to Tracy and Arthur on was featured on the show because they were murdered. And the reason why I used it as a source was because I know the format of the show. At the beginning, they go to the crime scene. You get introduced to the officers or the detectives who are working on the crime. You see them try to work out all the details and try to solve it. But every episode, literally 95% of them, when you get to the last 3 to 5 minutes, they are talking to the family of the victim. Now, how is that genealogically rich? My young cousin who was murdered, they interviewed his mother, they interviewed his fiance, and they showed his newborn baby. Where else am I going to get those details? Because birth indexes and all of that stuff does not really, it doesn't go into 2021. You're going to stop at years like 1995. Some states go later into the 2000s. But where they were living in Louisiana, we don't even have a Louisiana birth index. That doesn't even exist. So again, just about anything can be a source, okay? So you're starting with yourself, you're getting information from you, your family members, you're gathering documents, and this is when we go online, okay? Notice we have to do all of that before we go online. Why? Because there are certain things that you're gonna search and find online that you're gonna have questions about, and the documents and the stories are literally sitting in your home or they're with your family members, but you did not go and ask. And then you find out later that you could have gotten that information from something that you all had or that you could have interviewed somebody about. And the other piece is we often neglect getting that oral history from people who are living, and we don't think about getting it until they're gone. So interview folks now, ask them questions now. There are people in our family that I am so glad I called them a decade or so ago, and I just hand wrote the notes. And then once I did that, at one point I typed the notes up and put the dates and everything on their stories we will never get because they died with those people. Please interview your family members. So for the search, we're gonna use websites, right? Number one, most people here, just because of brand recognition, is Ancestry. It's got more records than just about any place you can think of, okay? And we heard earlier that the library does have a library edition of this. Ancestry is a subscription-based site, but let me give you a little something, okay? Accounts themselves are free. Your family tree is free. Where the fee comes in is when you access the documents. That's where the fee is. So if you come in and you use the library edition, right? You cannot create a tree on the library edition, but you can create one on your free account. So if you're like me, okay, one of the reasons why that book is so big that we produce is because I could not afford a subscription at one point. And so in order for me to still be able to glean all the information I needed when I was not at the library, I transcribed everything by hand off the census so I didn't have to go back to read it. Because I didn't have no money. Okay, right? Let's call a thing a thing. I couldn't afford a subscription. And so that's why, again, utilize your services, okay? If you can't afford a subscription, some folks, another trick that some of our family members do that research other branches is they will wait until subscriptions are half off and buy themselves a gift subscription for Christmas. And then when it expires, they just re-upload that gift certificate and they're good for the whole year, because they typically will go on sale during Christmas. So we're searching things like Ancestry. We're going to take some time today to go through that, to simulate the whole search experience, because one of the things that I know when I'm at conferences and when I work with people one-on-one is that folks don't know how to maneuver the site to find things. So we're going to talk about that. Ancestry also is, if you mentioned, Tracy mentioned Fold3 and newspapers.com, those are sister sites to Ancestry. They're all under the same umbrella, okay? Fold3 being for military records and newspapers.com being for newspapers. Family Search is the next site that we use the most, and that's run by the Mormon Church. Most people don't realize that the Mormon Church has been copying records around the world since the 1930s, because genealogy is one of the tenets of their faith, okay? And so because they don't know who was going to become Mormon, they went around pretty much everywhere, all over the world to get documents. And a lot of the source information or source collections that Ancestry has originate from Family Search if Ancestry didn't go and get the records themselves. Family Search is free. Now, you can build a tree on Family Search like you can on Ancestry, but I will also give you this caveat. Anybody can edit your tree, and you can't shut that off. So let's say you get back to a 4th great grandparent, and maybe everyone in your family that descends from that person keeps perpetuating the wrong information. You will see stuff like, there'll be a woman on there, she's born in 1752, she dies in 1812, but they have her having a baby in 1825. And you're like, this isn't right. I mean, unless she was cryogenically frozen and they brought her back to life, and then she got pregnant, had the 9 months, and then delivered the baby. That's a whole lot of ifs before we are even having cryogenically frozen people. You go in and you make the change, but people can keep coming back and adding it, and you can't control it. So realize that that's the one caveat to having a tree on Family Search, is that anybody can edit it and put back information back in there, okay? The other thing is, we are going anywhere where the records are. We don't care, okay? Sometimes this is a family, this is a state archives, right? Sometimes this is a university or a college. You're thinking, well, why? Well, you need to realize, especially when you get into the slavery era, okay? A lot of personal papers of slaveholding families are at colleges and universities all across the United States. Or they're in museum collections, or the families themselves still have them. And the only way to access information about those enslaved people, or one of the few ways you can, is if you go into those universities and those colleges to get them. And don't think that universities and colleges within the state of California don't have records on enslaved people from the South. They do. Don't think that the college has to be in Tennessee. No. They pick up they're bequeathed these collections from folks all over the place. It could be an alumni, it could be their child went to that school. There's no rhyme or reason. So don't make an assumption that it's going to be in the South if it occurred in the South. That's not the case. Great comment in the chat. Oral histories are wonderful. I did one with an aunt who was a code breaker with the Army Signal Corps, now the NSA during World War II. Such a tangible connection to history. California State University Fullerton has a Center for Oral and Public History. They hold workshops where conducting oral histories as well as online resources. Look at y'all getting free game from Miss Lorraine. Thank you, Miss Lorraine, adding that in there, okay? So go anywhere where the records are. Now, my suggestion is to start with the 1940 census. And in a few short weeks, we're gonna have 1950, and please don't call me and ask me for nothing after April 1st. I'm not around, I don't care, no. Y'all have to understand, we have 3,000 people in that book that Tracy has, and I've got to track down those people who were in 1950, and that's just one branch of my family, okay? So why are we starting with 40? People don't realize that the census has a privacy hold, It was created in the 1970s, so blame whoever was in Congress at that point. You wish we had 2020 available because we just did it. No, they require that the census get to the age of 72 or be released after 72 years in order for general use by the public. So this means that we only have up to 1940 to use. We get 1950 on April 1st of this year. We start with 40 again, because it's the one we have access to. Now, one thing I will mention about African American people, there was an undercount of approximately 2 million Black people were not included on the 1940 census. So if you don't, right. So you remember you were hearing a couple years ago about undercounts, right? Like, oh, we're doing all these efforts. We want to try. There's always been an undercount, always, always, always. And on this specific one, they believe that there were 2 million Black folks left out. And let me give you an example. My father and my aunt, his sister, and both my paternal grandparents were not on the 1940 census. My dad was born in 1937. My aunt was born in 1938. My grandmother was born in 1919, and my grandfather was born in 1914. No, they were not living in Lake Providence. You're like, where is that? They weren't there. They were on the south side of Chicago. That's one side. My maternal line that I'm related to Tracy and Arthur on, my great aunt, her husband, and their 5 oldest children, which includes Grace, Arthur, they were not on the 1940 census. My uncle, my mom's brother, and one of my mom's first cousins that lived with their moms who were sisters and their grandfather, they are not on the 1940 census. So that's just my immediate family. There are 20 people in my immediate family that are not on that census. And some of them lived in the North and some of them lived in the South. So you kind of know no bounds. So don't feel like you are striking out and you're hitting a wall if you don't find somebody on 40. Because again, we know that there was a decent sized undercount on that. You're also going to look for vital records, right? Marriages, births, deaths, military records. One of my favorite collections right now are World War II draft cards. I love those because, you know, on the back is my favorite part where they're like, what are any other distinguishing characteristics of this man? And it's things like, oh, he only has one eye, or he's missing a leg. Or you're like, how is he missing a leg? Or he only has 3 fingers on the right hand. How did that happen? Right? Just ask questions. And you get a time and a place of where people are living. So military records are great, and not just for World War II. Black men have been involved in every major conflict in US history, and you also can't discount the women, right? Especially when you're talking about the Civil War, the cooks and the maids who were working the camps. They got pensions as well. You have to also remember one of the most well-known spies during the Civil War was a woman named Harriet Tubman. So don't factor that out either. You're filling in blank spaces along the way as you gather information. Let's say you don't have a death date for your grandfather. When you go online and search, there's a death index for the state they lived in, and that's where you find the information that you've been looking for. But you know, the search supplements what you have at home and what you already know. When you're using the census, you're going back every 10 years based on who was in a household, right? Or the people that you know. And you're doing this, right? Every 10 years. So from 40, you go to 30, to 20, to 10, to 1900. Then from 1900, we've got to go to 1880 because the 1890 census was burned in a fire partially. And then the Commerce Department decided they were just going to burn the whole thing. I still want to know who did that. I would secretly believe there is some building in DC where there's a copy of the 1890 census hiding. I just keep holding out hope for that. But regardless, until that day happens, we go from 1900 to 1880 and then to 1870. When you get to 1870, that's where you have to pivot into that slavery era. Slavery ended with the 13th Amendment. Okay, that was in 1865, but the Civil War ran from 1861 to 1865. So that's a very crucial time period. And there are other records you can use to fill in the blanks. But again, most people, you're going to start on the census and then use other documents to keep going. Now, focus on one line at a time. I know it's tempting when those hints and stuff start popping up. It's like bright, shiny objects. You're going to want to go for it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Right? Try to focus on one line at a time. If you're like us, where our family stayed in the same location for a long time, and again, you have these names that are repeating on both sides, you might get confused. You know, just think about the 1950 census and how many Barbaras we're going to see on there. Or how many Garys. A lot of people, right? That's a name that's more common. When you focus on one line at a time, it'll also help you, okay? Spelling doesn't count. Think of literacy rates in our country, okay? You also have to think about the folks that we're documenting, especially Black folks, okay? They're putting down what they think they hear. They're trying to spell it phonetically. And that may not necessarily be the way that that person spelled their name, right? I can imagine Tracy gets T-R-A-C-Y, she's gotten that her whole life. And she's like, I'm I-E, I'm I-E. The end is I-E, it's I-E, right? Sex, right, or Arthur, his last name is Crosby. People have probably called him Crosby his whole life. Or he could have been documented under Crosby, not Crosby, but Crosby, right? Factor that in, okay? And again, what you would look for in that instance where a name may be spelled wrong is you're looking for, if it's a family group, do the children's names match? Do the ages match? Do the locations match? That's what matters more in that instance. No racial identifiers, okay? There's another thing, just like seeing that woman that had a baby 20 years after she died, there are people saving records for white folks that are supposed to be Black on their trees and they didn't look at the race. It happens a lot, okay? Some censuses and some records, some things will be Negro, but then you'll get to a time span on the census where the directions or the instructions for the enumerator told them they couldn't use mulatto, so they had to choose Negro. In fact, Tracy and Arthur, this will probably crack you up. I told my grandmother that she was noted as mulatto on the census, and my grandmother laughed, crying, laughing. She was like, when? She's like, when have I ever been mulatto? Like, they knew my grandmother. They're like, they marked hers, but yes, they marked my grandmother and all her siblings as mulatto on the 1920 census. Why? Because their mother appeared that way. So sometimes, again, you'll see that. Then you get into crazy stuff like quadroon, octoroon, griff. Then when they start getting into the funky census enumeration math, when it comes to blood quantums with Native American groups, I mean, it's just cockamamie, okay? So just be clear, especially when you get into states like Louisiana, oh Lord, it gets real interesting. And since you all are in California, that makes perfect sense because in terms of the Great Migration, a lot of Black folks are coming to California from the most Western states in the Deep South, which include Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, and even Arkansas, okay? Read everything. Don't think, oh, I just got the information I need, that death date, that's it. No, if you have a death certificate for someone and you don't look over the cause of death, you're missing something. You're not looking at who was the person who was the informant, who provided the information. If you're not looking at that, where they lived at that time, that's important. Why is an informant important? Well, it's gonna tell you where they lived. You know they lived there as of the date of that death certificate. That helps you with your timeline. Or even where the individual who died, where they were living. Some death certificates will even tell you how long they had been in that community. They'll say all life or maybe 25 years. If you're just focused on the actual date and not the additional granular details, like even things like what cemetery they're buried in, you're leaving stuff on the table. And lastly, we're gonna use DNA as a backup, okay? You don't have genealogy without DNA, and you don't have DNA without genealogy. What does that mean? That means that you can go down a paper trail of researching your family and your genetic tree is not the same as your paper tree. There's a whole set of circumstances, right? We know about Maury. You guys know about Maury. And you are not the father, right? In genealogy, we have a term called non-parental event, okay? Those things happen through moms and dads. People do not know. You know, as one of my genealogy buddies says, we were not down there shining the light when it happened, okay? So if that's the case, trees might be different and you may have to shift and pivot, okay? So with that said, I wanna do a quick reminder. every generation, our number of ancestors doubles. So that means that when you have 4 grandparents, you have 8 great-grandparents. Then you have 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, and 64 great-great-great-great-grandparents. When you're talking in terms of African American families, where the enslaved ancestors start is different based on the age of the individual and how many years are between generations. Now, even though Tracy could be my older sister, she is on the same generation of the family with my son, who is 7 years old. No, I didn't misspeak. Her line of the family, they had more children and more quickly than mine did. So I'm on the same generation of the family with Tracy's dad. That's odd. Now, in Arthur's scenario, Arthur's family, Arthur's branch, they were slow like us on kids. So technically, I'm on the same generation as Arthur's kids, but each generation is different. And whereas my great-great-grandparents were enslaved, right? Tracy's great-great-great-grandparents were enslaved. Starts differently for everyone. But when you get up to at least great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, you're talking about 124 different people. Unless your family lived in a small environment and there's a little crossover back in the day. Now, we couldn't prevent that, okay? We can't prevent that, right? I'm living in the area, no lie. My son was talking about this little girl in his class, telling me it was his girlfriend. And I was like, no, you were too young to be having a girlfriend, you're 7. And he's just telling me about her and all this. And I found out what her last name was. And I said, oh no, she can't be your girlfriend. And he said, why? And I said, because that's your cousin. Now they're 7, right? They don't know, but I saw her last name. I said, oh no, you know, my husband's related to half the county here. So no, you need to go to the next county or the next county, whenever it's time for you to start dating. But that often happens when people when people move or don't move, actually, even to this day. All right. So any questions? You guys are quiet. Did you want me to go in and start showing a few documents? Because I also want to have time to do some searches if you guys have questions around searches.
Oh, we have one question.
Sure.
Where and how do you research military records?
So yeah, so military, there are some that are on Ancestry. Those would be things like draft cards from World War II. Here's an example, and they all pretty much look the same from World War II, right? This is one, this is actually my grandfather, and it's one hallmark of the Great Migration, okay? Where the address, no, it's 5714 Vincennes on the south side of Chicago, but he's born in New Orleans. This is a great hallmark of the Great Migration, right? Because wait a minute, you're born in New Orleans, but you live in Chicago? Well, hello, yes, because of the Great Migration, them leaving the Deep South. In fact, his parents left about 1925, they left New Orleans. And you've got information like, you know, the old school phone numbers, Ken 1419, that was their phone number. And then you got, how do I know it's him? Lois Sewell is my grandmother, and her relationship to him is wife, okay? So you're gonna find things like draft cards, enlistment records. You're gonna find even cruise books for people who were in the Navy. You'll find those on fold 3. Civil War era, you'll find service records. You'll find even records of death, burials for the military. In fact, one of the greatest resources I think for deaths, or you know, it's kind of a precursor to sites like Find a Grave, are U.S. military deaths. The VA and VA cemetery locator, where if someone was issued a military headstone, they have a tracking of where that information, you know, where the burials took place. There's a whole database for that that's on Ancestry, and it's also on the VA's website. They even now on Ancestry have the cards, the control forms for the person who ordered the military headstone. You'll find that on Ancestry too. So yeah, there's a million, there's a kind of like a million different records for military, but it depends on the conflict. if there was a conflict, even Korean War, there's stuff there, Spanish American War. If you go back as far as American Revolution, you can then use a source like DAR and their ancestor search to find people who have proven lineage to a patriot. Yeah, it really depends on the time period. I know I gave you a long answer, but there's a ton of stuff for military. Any other questions?
We have another question.
Yes.
Yes,
do you
ma'am.
Okay, so you can see me, okay? Not to look like anything much.
Hi, how you doing?
Do you have to keep it on the paternal side of the family, or are you jumping maternal, you know, you understand? Or is it easier if you stay on the father's side where the name trail should be simpler to track?
No, you can jump to whatever. My initial research, like how I got started doing all of this, was on my maternal grandmother's side of the family. That's how I'm related to Tracy and Arthur. But then, you know, that you pivot into your different grandparents. One of the things that I suggest to folks is, you know, start with one line at a time, and usually you'll kind of start hitting things. You start picking stuff up, and then you'll have a lull where you aren't finding things. That's when you can pivot to another grandparent. Or sometimes when new collections come out, because they come out all the time, maybe you hold looking into that until you stop making finds on one branch, and then you pivot over to that, because you need that fuel. Because this is tiring. You know, it can get tiring. The other thing is, while I'm talking about this from a very positive standpoint, some of the stuff that you're going to encounter is very emotional, and you might have to take a step back for a couple days because of what you read and what you find. And so with that said, at some point, especially when you get into the slavery era and really Jim Crow and Reconstruction, I mean, gosh, it's like even today, day to day, you have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence to be able to read through things. I'll give you an example. We started going to research on site where our family is from. We would go to the courthouse. And the first time we went, there was one Black woman that worked in the courthouse. And she knew while we were there, the clerk had been working in this courthouse for more than 50 years. She'd been elected the clerk. And when we arrived, she said, oh, you know, hey, you guys, you can go look wherever. The one Black woman in the office walked over to us, and she had to whisper to tell us where to find the records for slaves. Now, this was in 2007. The next year we came, and the same one Black woman was in the office, and she took us to the back. And instead of whispering, she told us she ran for clerk and she won. And she was the first Black clerk that parish had ever had. So I say this to say, sometimes you encounter that when you're doing research. We also discovered, matter of fact, I don't think I've told anybody in the family this, but the lady that was the clerk the first time we went, she was the notary that notarized the grand jury subpoena of my uncle when he was a part of the NAACP down there, where they tried to get their membership lists to basically harass people because they were organizing a voting rights campaign. That's what we walked in the room to. So yes, some days it's great and it's facts and it's other stuff. And then some days it's what I just told you. So I would not implore you to learn about American history in a more intimate way than what you're doing through family history research. And it may not necessarily be from the vantage point of your family. It may be your neighbor, it may be a friend, it may be someone who married into your family. But especially with some of the conversations that we're having now around history and erasure, you learn to talk about them and digest the information differently when you can attach it to real people who were living, who were connected to you. So I just offer that to say that, yes, that did happen. And Miss Brock died. But when I found her name on that subpoena, I was like, no, she did not have us in that courthouse. Oh, I was so bad. I was so bad. I was like, you know what? But that's okay. There's a reason why I'm finding out about it later. So time has changed, but it has not very much. So I just want to touch on something really quickly. before we go into some live searches. You all may be watching popular television and you may encounter things like the slave schedules. And you may have heard about this. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the slave schedules, so enslaved people were counted on the census ever since the first one in 1790. Okay. So don't think, oh, when people say, oh, slaves weren't on the census. No, they were counted, right? You think about things like the 3/5 compromise. How do you even know how to apportion that in terms of voting power unless you know how many enslaved people there are? How do they have numbers? They counted them on the census, okay? And so every census, they're counted, they're not listed by name, okay? We get to 1850. There's a decision made by Congress where we want to enumerate the total number of slaves on a separate schedule, okay? And they decide, okay, well, we're going to capture the names. Well, this senator from South Carolina named Andrew Pickens Butler, he argues that because the census had only counted numbers of enslaved people, that there was no useful information that could be gleaned by obtaining their names at this point. So even though there were slave schedules in 1850, these are separate from the census, right? Same, a part of the census, but on a separate, sort of pages. 1850 and 1860, he said, okay, when the debates began, the census heretofore has only required the numbers of the slaves, and I see no useful information the obtaining the names could afford. On a plantation where there are 100, 200, or 300 slaves, there are perhaps several of the same name and who are known simply by some familiar designation on the plantation. It could afford no useful information and will make a great deal of labor. So with just that debate by our elected officials, the names of 4 million people were omitted from a federal record set. And what you have are what you're looking at. Where instead of see where it says name of slave owners, that's where the name of the slaves was supposed to go. We get a blank line with an age, a gender identity, and a race. So this is where we have that pivot, okay? When you're trying to find records for the formerly enslaved. What do? You have to search out other record sets. You have to think like a capitalist, but instead of whatever you are thinking in terms of selling, like a boat or a car, you have to think about it from the vantage point of selling people. That means when you're talking about property transactions, you're doing things or looking for things like conveyances or deeds, where property is transacted from one individual to another. When we're having conversations around quote unquote legislation that makes people feel bad about history, my offering to that is just provide the documents and let people make the assumptions for themselves. This is a deed. This is a real deed from Mississippi, where it lists Negro men slaves Cook, Ben, Dick, Tom, Hardy, Frank, Peter, Charles, Jake, the Negro women slaves Sophia, Charlotte, Zuiga, Powella, Kawamba, and children slaves Jack, Sophia, and Lucy. Do not for once think that enslaved people are not listed in documents. They are, because they were money walking around on 2 legs. Just as you, those who were there in person, drove your car to public transportation to get to where you are, whoever owned the mode of transportation knows where that vehicle is or knows where that form of transportation is. Enslaved people were the same way. And then the care wasn't even taken to make sure that every transaction was documented officially. So beyond deeds, you also have probates and successions. Well, what is this? A slaveholder dies, they have a will. They have to leave their property to their next of kin. They can choose to do so in a will, or if they died without one, they have to probate, they have to inventory their estate, whether there's a will or not. And among on this one, 80 bales of cotton weighing 400 pounds at 10 cents a pound, worth $3,200, or 2,800 bushels of corn that have a value of $2,800 in 1862 is item to Negroes. King, age 55 years, and his wife Rachel, age 55 years. William, age 19 years, and age 15 years. And let me just say that King and Rachel ain't funny doing this to me today, because do you guys know that William is who Tracy descends from, and Andrew is who Arthur descends from? That 19-year-old boy and that 15-year-old boy, their great-great-great-granddaughter and great-great-grandson, actually great-grandson, are sitting in the room with you today.
I didn't know that.
Right, he's like, oh my God. This is, well, you got to update your book, Tracy, because this is in the most recent one. Right. King and Rachel are my third great grandparents. And down this inventory, you will see little King, age 22, and his wife, Drusilla. This is my great-great-grandfather and his first wife. I did not even know he had a first wife until I found this inventory. It took me 20 years to find this. 20. And it was not because I didn't have oral history. You guys see the book right there in the room with you, right? It wasn't because somebody didn't leave me research. Oh no, our research project has been going for 40 years. It's just that our family did not choose the last name Short. King said, nope, y'all ain't gonna be researching slaveholders. That's why I was thrown off for 20 years, because I couldn't choose name proximity. There are no other atlases. If you meet a set of Black atlases, they're related to us. So again, all these things exist, okay? Other collections, there's things like ship manifests. The importation of African slaves was banned in our original Constitution in 1808. That meant that you could not bring slaves from Africa to the United States after 1808. But we know that people moved around that because of things like the Clotilda in Mobile. Who has heard of that? If you haven't, let me give you something to watch this evening. On Hulu, you can watch a National Geographic special that just came out about the Clotilda. It is the last slave ship, air quotes, to bring in Africans from Africa. They came from Benin. They were brought in 1860. So because of this law, in order to transport enslaved people on the coast, right? Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, you had to have a ship manifest that designated those things. And this one is for two enslaved people, a female named Esther, who was 5 feet tall, and who was enslaved by a man named George Little of Alabama, and a 4-year-old boy named Ben, who was also enslaved by a man named George Little, Alabama. And they were going from New Orleans to Mobile, which is just a short ride. And this is from 1826. I'm showing you all these records because, again, there's this thought process that enslaved people they're not documented on paper. And so you'll be my voices out in the public that says, I saw records of slaves' names, right? One more before we go into searches, maybe a couple. This is from the Freedmen's Bureau. I can come back and talk about this for 3 hours, because if you really want to know what was going on in America after the Civil War, you need to read through the Freedmen's Bureau. This is a report of rations, people who were hungry and destitute in Iberville Parish, Louisiana. Note the people in yellow. There are 2 100-year-old people on this rations list in 1867. Do the math. If somebody is 100 years old in 1867, that means they're older than the United States. Also note that the man named John Prudhomme does not have a slaveholder, which means that he was free by the time the war started, or he never had one. And a woman named Betsy Thoreau, she was owned by a man named Emilion Melancon. And they list who her former slaveholder was. There are documents that are like this that do that. There are also certificates of freedom, where in some locations that free people were required by law to register every year so they could decipher between you and somebody who was enslaved. This one is for a woman named Flubella Gaither, who was age 29. Notice they break down her complexion, her height. They talk about her having a scar on her right arm caused by a burn. They note that she was born free and that there was an affidavit of another person named James Newton that validated this information in 1860. Now, since you're in California, I will show you a Native American record that connects back to Black people. Most folks do not know that the 5 tribes, being the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole Nations, practice chattel slavery. When you hear about the Trail of Tears, don't you ever for a minute after this moment think that it was just Native American people or that there were no slaves that were part of that. They were. In fact, right now, my nation is hosting a session where they are talking about the enslaved who are a part of the Cherokee Nation. This is the first time in centuries that that has been done. Now, most people are trying to get back to a DOS card because they want to find an individual with on these cards that was approved for a land allotment and thus citizenship, and their descendants are entitled to citizenship in one of the 5 tribes. This is one for a 104-year-old man who was actually rejected by the DOS Commission. Do the math. He is 104 in the year 1901. The forced removal, meaning the Trail of Tears, happened in the 1830s and 1840s. So this man lived long enough to experience that, make it to the Indian Territory, stay there his whole life, and they still rejected him for citizenship. All right. Last but not least, census records. This is 1870. There's a thought we can't trace back to Africa, or we don't know who our African ancestors are. This is from Wilkinson County, Mississippi. Note the woman in yellow. She is 90 years old, meaning she is born in 1780. Her birth location is Africa. What does this mean? This means that this woman survived the transatlantic slave trade, survived slavery in America, and lived to see freedom as a 90 or 85-year-old woman. I hope I've convinced you can find slaves. If not, well, I don't know what else to tell you at this point. But I want to, if you guys have searches, things, again, that you want to try, I want to give you the opportunity to do that. And those of you who are here virtually, it's about 12, 11 of us. Miss Sharon Price has got her hand up. Go ahead, Miss Sharon. You can unmute yourself, or I'll ask you to unmute.
Thank you.
There you
This
go.
is amazing. I'm so grateful for you. My question is, I have, my mother's father owned land in Louisiana, and it was taken from him. And my mom was the youngest child, and she really didn't know how to go about researching it. And I don't have enough information because all of her relatives have passed on. I do know his name, and I just don't know where to start. And I don't have confidence that the records are still available. I have a—
Oh, girl, don't say that in Louisiana. Arthur knows.
Okay, Arthur, good.
I'm just saying, I'm saying don't say the records aren't there. The reason why is what people fail to realize, especially in all these conversations around critical race theory, is that people are making an assumption that the bad intentions and the triflingness was not laid bare on paper.
Okay, so you don't think that after the fire, they decided, let's shred and burn these? Trump wasn't in office then, so maybe things were a little bit different.
Honey, listen.
I did not mean to say that. I'm sorry.
Well, no,
But
I'm just saying. What I'm saying is people were brazen. This stuff happened on paper. You know what I mean? So where it may not be, we took his land because there was oil on it. You can do research on the people who bought it to find that they owned an oil company, and then they got oil leases in order to start drilling. See where you have to do your kind of deductive reasoning a little bit, because again, most of the stuff is laid bare. So for your example, depending on when your grandfather was born or when your mother was born, If you don't have a parish that you know to look in Louisiana, I would try to find those folks on the census so then you can get an idea.
Okay, we have found him on the census. I don't have all the details right now,
Right.
but
Okay. So yeah, so if he's on the census, one of the things, again, remember, you're reading every column on the census, and I'll pull up an example so you guys can see what I'm talking about. With the census, every row has, or every column has information, and it will tell you whether or not the individual owned their land. There will be an O in the column, whether home owned or rented. And it will tell you their occupation in terms of them being a farmer, being a farm laborer. If a person is a farmer, they're the person who's leasing the land or who owns the land. If they are a farm laborer, they usually are sharecropping. That's your clue. So we'll go to the funny census where my grandmother cried when she was laughing at the fact that they listed her as mulatto. This is a great starting point. She was like, girl, I am not mulatto. She thought it was the funniest thing she had ever seen in her life. Okay, so this is 1920. And there's Granny at the bottom as a 3-year-old, clearly not laughing at her race. But note here, Louis Atlas is my great grandfather. And in this column is whether or not the home is rented or owned. Notice there's an O.
okay,
Just about every census has this question. They'll
Okay.
tell you if it's mortgaged. Notice it's mortgaged.
okay,
Now, if you're in the state of Louisiana, you're gonna have conveyance books, which are like deeds, right? Like the
Right.
register of deeds in California. All of those are gonna be at the clerk of court's office for the parish, okay? You're gonna have deed books or conveyance books. You're also gonna have a separate set of books that are just for mortgages, where they lay out the terms of the mortgage, how much a total sum was, when the payments were due. You know how we get, when you buy a home, it's 5% interest, payments due on the 1st or the 15th, whatever the terms are. They had stuff like that set up. And let me go ahead and twist it for you all too. They mortgage slaves. They mortgaged against slaves. They use slaves as collateral. So you will find them in the same books, just prior to slavery ended.
no,
Right. Note, it says farm. See the FM tells you it's a farm. Okay. And every column is information: race, age, marital status. If they naturalize, if they were immigrants, you would have that information in these columns. Whether they attended school, whether or not they could read or write, the birthplace that they were in, right? Now, Louisiana had to get real contrary, because that's what we do, because people speak French there. So they had to designate whether or not the father spoke English.
okay,
So, or French, right? So they left it blank. English is default, right? You've got birthplace of the person, their tongue, if they spoke English or French or whatever the language is. Birthplace of father, their tongue. Birthplace of mother, their tongue. Whether the individual whose line we on speaks English, their occupation, their industry, their employment type, right? Notice it changes for the other people in the household. The older children are going to be usually listed, and the spouse are going to be listed as laborers.
okay,
So extract all of that information off the census, get as close as you can to when you think the transaction happened. And I can pretty much guarantee you, if you're going well into the 20th century, you're not going to be able to find those conveyance records and mortgages online. You're going to actually have to go to Louisiana to get them.
okay.
But it's not impossible. And of
All
course,
right.
you got to let us know what you find.
I will. I can't wait to give you the final analysis. I hope
Right,
it doesn't
yeah.
take 20 years though.
I hope not either, but again, these are conveyance records. You know the parish, or you're not sure the parish?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I know that
okay.
it was near I think it's the Sabine River.
Oh, that's on the Texas side. Yeah, Sabine River, Sabine Parish, so where our family, what you're looking at is East Carroll Parish, that's Northeast Louisiana. Sabine is Northwest. It's closer to Texas.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, things you want me to look up?
Thank
Help
you.
with searching? No problem, Miss Sharon. Oh, let me see. There was also something in the chat. Laureen asked, William Van is listed as 104 years old. Could some of these very old ages be based on people estimating birth dates? Yes, it could be, because people couldn't read or write, so they didn't have a calendar to mark things down. Other things, people had family Bibles in places where they recorded information. Slaveholders had ledgers, so they knew the exact age of people. So sometimes they could be an estimate, sometimes not. With William Van, he was very consistent about his age. So yeah, but usually for me, I vacillate with 10 years until we get into the 1930s. I give people 10 years grace on their age. No, usually depending on who you're talking to. Sometimes folks start getting younger as they get older. So, that's very obvious.
Okay, we have another question in the audience, Nicka.
Yes.
I was wondering about when there's information in a family tree or a genealogy tree, what might be the process for correcting incorrect information?
Right. Now that depends on whoever owns the tree. Remember that example I gave earlier about the woman having a child 20 years after she died, right? If you are not an editor on someone's tree, you cannot go in and edit the information. So usually what you need to do is just message them and say, hey, Christine, so I saw you had her having a baby 30 years after she died. I don't think that happened. Just being very patronizing, but you just kind of suggest. And sometimes people will argue you, and that bad information will just be out there. And that's the one caveat to this is, even if you are operating with good intentions on the information that you put out, a new record set could come out and completely disprove what you have, right? So if folks start copying you and they start copying bad information, then you just have no way of controlling it. So sometimes people, they will have like a working tree that they have where they're testing out theories on, relations to people. And I have a tree that's just for DNA. Our family, we have over 120 people DNA tested. So I know if Tracy's in common, that's coming from King and Rachel. There's no other way. That's who we share in common as ancestors. If I see Arthur's daughter involved, I know it's King and Rachel, because that's how we're related. And with DNA trees, again, stuff changes. You find out, you just find out surprising information, or you find new cousins that don't know they're related to you. But even in that aspect, you're at the mercy of people copying bad information. So, if you're doing your due diligence and your tree is right, just make sure you put your sources and maybe cross your fingers and say a Hail Mary and just hope that everybody copies your tree. But beyond that, we can't send a broadcast message out that cousin Christine is wrong because she didn't realize the woman was dead when she claimed they had a baby 30 years after she died. That's the one bad part. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, on my father's side of the family tree, I looked up his mother's family, the James's, Louisiana, and everybody's listed, and even my father, as mulatto. They don't say what they mix with or anything, but everybody's birth certificate, my grandfather and my grandmother, then all the kids are listed as mulatto too. So how do you figure out what they're mixed with? You gotta take a DNA test?
Well, no, because again, I just showed you that example. Do you want to see a picture of my grandmother so you can see who they marked as mulatto? Because some of it is, again, the enumerators for the census, sometimes it was go with what the general consensus is in the neighborhood. And I'm like, what's the general consensus of the neighborhood? Sometimes they told them, don't ask the people, just go on what they look like. Well, in Louisiana, that could be a lot of stuff, right? Like, again, people just look different. So every set of records, like where 1920 says mulatto for my grandmother, 1930 says Black because they couldn't use it. So I wouldn't necessarily, I would not die on the hill of mulatto, if that makes sense. That sounds like a t-shirt. I wouldn't die on that hill. I think what's more important is getting your paper trail together, and if, again, it could just be the mother, right? Because slavery was matrilineal, meaning the mother's disposition, or if the mother was free, the mother was free when the child was born, the child is free. If a mother was enslaved, the child was enslaved. People also follow that sort of line of thinking around racial identifiers. So if the mom looked mulatto, then the child was marked mulatto, even though the dad is marked as Black. So you could use DNA. Well, because all of the stuff that happened during the Civil War, before and after, is right there. And it's laid bare. There are people that I share DNA with that have no African DNA that told me we weren't related. And I'm like, you took a DNA test, I took a DNA test. We sent them off to a third party, they processed them, and then they identified that we were related. Because reckoning with that is too much. So you could use DNA and use a process of elimination based off of family members that have tested on that respective side, the matches you guys have in common, and you could identify who the person is.
Nicka,
That's more than possible. Yes, ma'am.
can you share with everybody when you after I did
your grandfather?
Yeah, this was totally
right. So Tracy says she texts me and she says, Nicka, something's going on with my DNA. And I was like, what? She was like, I have a percentage that's here. This has got to be wrong. And so I said, well, share it with me. So she shares it with me, and she shows up. I'm trying to think, hold on. You are like a quarter Mexican?
Yes.
And I was like, whoa. I said, okay, we gotta start asking questions, because this is not the story we have. And so we're gonna start looking at it. Let me see, where is it at? Yeah, so like it ends up being right. And okay, so for those of you who have done DNA, most people will stay on the screen and not go to the DNA matching. But this is Tracy live in the DNA flesh. You guys have got her in 2 different iterations. You got her in the room and you have her DNA now. But notice she's like, her highest percentage is Nigeria. Then she's got Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu peoples. Then Benin. But note, Spain is 8%. And then she's got indigenous Mexico, 7. So that's 15. Where is this coming from? That's not 5. That's not 2. Then when you drill down, this is how good Ancestry is with this stuff. I wish you guys could meet with the scientists that do this, because they are like the smartest people ever to me. But they even drill down into communities where they'll tell you where in Mexico, not just Mexico, but your folks are from Chihuahua, Durango, and Zacatecas. Right there, boom. Right there, boom. Northwestern Chihuahua and far west Texas. That's where this person is coming from. And so what we did is we relegated it to, okay, well, we know it's not the Atlas side. We know it's not coming. Well, we know it's not coming from your mom.
No.
So that side is ruled out. We know it's not coming from your paternal grandmother. So it's got to be your grandfather. And we found out that her grandfather was half white and half Mexican. Which is why her percentages showed up the way that they did. And this often throws people, because there's always well, my grandmother was full-blooded, fill in the blank, right? Well, which grandmother? Is it just a grandmother? Is it a great-grandmother? Is it a great-great? If that person is 100%, right? And they don't intermarry with another person from that community, if it's a great-grandparent, their child, your grandparent is half. Their child, your parent is 25. By the time it gets down to you, it's in the teens. It's not going to show up that high. And sometimes with recombination, which is a fancy word for like going to the bar and ordering the same mojito, and Arthur has a couple more pieces of ice than I do, even with that, because of the randomness of DNA, it may not pass down to you that pristine. So you might not inherit any of it, but your sister does, or your brother does. So, yeah. So Tracy didn't know she was Mexican, and we started this whole journey. Right. And then I figured out.
All these second and third cousins are from New Mexico and Texas. I mean, I go, is this legit? And she's like, the DNA does not lie, Tracy, doesn't lie. So
They're right there.
it's still kind of perplexing because we were able to drill all the way back to the early 1920s, and I do know who those family members are, and I have pictures. So this is a fourth grade grandparents that were Hispanic. The grandmother was Hispanic, and the grandfather is white from Texas.
Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was very shocking.
Texas.
I read the results and I'm like, what? And when Nicka called me, she said, you have an ancestor from Mexico and nobody else in the entire family has that ancestor. What's going on? So
I lost something just in that. I think I heard this once before. Did she say something? I don't know if you're sisters and brothers, but that it could be in your DNA, but not necessarily in your sister or brother's DNA.
So I have some half siblings.
Well, no, I'm thinking full.
Right. But even full, right.
That you can show up in you, but I'm thinking full sister or brother, and may not show up in their DNA.
Yeah,
Right.
you only get half.
Right.
It doesn't make, you don't get the exact same half,
No.
so it gets all mixed up.
Correct. But in Tracy's scenario, she has a half sibling through this parent that this lineage comes through, and they share the same people and they have the same communities. In fact, in genetics, half relationships for half siblings and half cousins are better sometimes than full, because you're not dealing with two people, you're only dealing with one. So yeah, we did that. I mean, and this is not a scenario where this is her grandfather. This is how close this is. This is not, great. No. We know we have him, the person, same community. We've already literally he's enlisted. He's at a base. It's the same city. Like, you can't get any more convincing than that. And sometimes that's all you have. Sometimes people have a smoking gun and they want a smoking gun, but you can't get the smoking gun because miscegenation like this is often not recorded on paper when it comes to Black folks. Like, it just isn't. And so even though you want it, all you may have is a very good circumstantial case where you've got the two people at the same place at the same time. You know the date of conception, when people start moving around, and sometimes that's all you have. I mean, literally, I was reading a thread about Thomas Jefferson earlier, and that whole liaison he had with Sally Hemings, and how for years her descendants said it happened, but Thomas Jefferson's descendants said it did not. They DNA test, and then all this stuff starts coming out. Then you find out at Monticello, they made her room into a bathroom. Then they started taking the stuff off the wall. There's her room. So sometimes this is historical memory of one group coming into conflict with another one. And sometimes the stories aren't the same. So. Any other questions? One other thing I would say about Fold 3, which is new. Oh, before I forget, newspapers.com is free for this entire weekend. So if you don't have it, go look. Let me mess up your whole weekend. If you have a spouse, tell them Nicka did it. Tell them Nicka did it. Okay, so newspapers.com has the most. It's the place for newspapers online. It has more newspapers than any other site. It is free through the weekend, including the Publisher Extra, which, in my experience, are papers that are more current, going up to like yesterday. Okay, if you're researching in places like Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, you need to be on newspapers.com. Incredible stuff. And even some other locations. So that's free through the weekend. For Fold 3, the difference between how you would search on that and Ancestry is it's much more of a loose search. I'll give you an example of that really quickly. So the way that Fold 3 is set up is it's set up by conflict. And you guys give me the thumbs up when you can see it, because it seems like my connection might be a little, there we go. It's set up based on conflict. So you see how it's defaulted for the United States. You've got Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, okay? It's set up, the collections are set up based off of conflicts, right? You see it goes in chronological order. There's also Native American records on here and non-military stuff. What I mean by this being a loose search is on Ancestry, where you have the first name and the last name in your search, right? Let me clear this. Okay. You see how you've got a first and middle name and a last name? Fold 3 is much more loose, where it's just put it in, okay? So my suggestion when you're searching for records on Fold 3 is if we're searching for a name like Louis Atlas, put it in quotation marks, and it will qualify your search to just whatever is within those quotation marks. Otherwise, it's gonna look for things with Louis and the word Atlas, but not next to each other. You can also search just by name, see how you have name or keywords and a place called Louis Atlas, which I'm sure he probably would have wanted that, but that doesn't exist. Another clue is, especially since Grandpa Babe, also known as Louis Atlas, his name is spelled Lewis, L-E-W-I-S or L-O-U-I-S. Normally it's L-O-U-I-S, but what you can do is underneath here where it says exact, you can click sounds like or similar. Okay, or if you had initials, since it's Louis B. Atlas, you can put just initials. You can select that, so it'll pick up anything that's Lewis or LB. Okay. Now, since last names like Atlas get butchered, you can also do ATLAS, and you can do the same thing with the exact, sounds like, similar, and SoundX. Okay, and they'll give you more information about those settings there. With locations, since I know he lived in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana, you start typing it, it'll autocomplete. Let's say Grandpa Babe decided he was gonna stay in Oak Grove because Grandma Susie kicked him out the house and he was gonna be with his cousin Eliza. So maybe he's there recorded in records. What we can do is instead of clicking exact to, we can choose East Carroll or that county / parish or adjacent counties. Or you could choose the state or adjacent states or the country. That's also something you can use to search. Now, if you don't have at least 3 fields filled out on this search form on Ancestry, it's gonna pop up a box. Can you guys see this box? Okay. Can you see it better now?
Yes.
Your search is too broad. It's gonna say, where did he live? Because your searches are better when you have at least 3 fields filled out. So if you don't know, you can say, I don't know. Then, when's his birth year? Well, if you don't know, we could say, well, he was about 29 when my grandmother was born, and that was in 1916. So it'll calculate an age. And then you go through your steps. It'll ask you other names of relatives to fill in. And if you don't know those, it's okay. And then you can click search. And it'll fill in your details. And then it'll give you people with those respective things. Now, Grandpa Babe was born in 1874. And I know he wasn't living in New York ever. If he ever went to New York, that would surprise the mess out of me. But either way, yeah, those are just clues on searching. Okay. Let's see, there's a person in the chat. There's a question about recording, Trace. Yes. It is recording. It is recording. Any other questions? You guys are a captive audience.
I have, we have a question.
Did you mention that there was going to be a special about Clotilda?
Oh, it's on PBS.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right. It's on now. Yeah. It's through National Geographic. I know it's available on Hulu. Also, I will add that if you watch the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, the drummer, Questlove from The Roots, he is a descendant of one of the people that was on the Clotilda. And he has a documentary that just came out that's about it, that two people with the last name Obama, they have a production company and a deal with Netflix, just acquired the rights for it. So that'll be airing on Netflix at some point this year, if you missed the National Geographic iteration.
Thank you.
Yes. And Erin wants to know, where will this be posted on the library site? She wants to know where she's supposed to be looking for the recording.
Who is it? Who's
This is Erin Prentice. She's in the chat here.
I can send it to her. I can
Okay.
email.
She says she will email it to you.
Anybody else want the recording? I'd be happy to email it to you as well.
Sure, for the session here?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Before we're done, just let me know and I'll make sure it'll be processed today and I'll make sure to send it out today. We have another question.
Full
Okay.
three is military related? Full
Yes,
three?
it is.
And the
Yes,
library
it's military.
has a subscription to Fold 3.
Okay.
So same with newspapers.com. So after your free weekend, you can still access that through the library's website.
Oh, you go through the library's website?
Yeah, through the library's website. Yeah, we just got that subscription at the end of the year. And I really pushed it because I just knew those were important resources. If people were going to be doing any kind of genealogy research, including military research. Yes.
Do we need to get a library card to
You
access?
do. Yes. Now with the Fold 3, threefold, you do have to create an account to access the records through our subscription, but it's free.
And you can do that from home or you have to come into the library?
The only thing you have to do here at the library is the ancestry access that is in the library only. During the pandemic, they did make it available for free from home, but now you have to access it here. But the other products you can access from home. So newspapers.com, the military site, and Heritage Quest.
You need a library card, which you can get on the way out, right?
Yes, you can get your library card if you don't have one, or you can apply for one online and you can access those resources right away.
And the military records is the Fold 3.
It's Fold 3, right? Sure.
If you're researching on newspapers.com, and let's say there's a newspaper that existed in the early 20th century, but it's folded now, but you don't know that. How do you find out that that was there? You know what I'm saying? What's your starting process?
Right. So one of the things that I use, so in addition to newspapers.com, there's other sites like Newspaper Archive, Genealogy Bank. We also have an incredible resource from the Library of Congress called Chronicling America, which also has newspapers. And one of their incredible things is the directory of papers going from like the 1600s until present. And they will tell you all the newspapers that operated in a respective county or parish throughout the country. And they'll tell you who has microfilm of them and how many issues they sort of catalog to date. And that's a resource that I use a lot. I will show it to you. Let's see. Okay, here we go. And I'll put this in the chat for the people that are in here virtually. Okay. Oh Lord, I can hear my mother complaining about the print size on this website. I got to go in 150%. Got this print over here so small. I can't even see it. I can see it, but I'm just thinking about you guys. Okay, so it's chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. Even if you just Google it, you can get it. Note this purple button here, U.S. Newspaper Directory, 1690 to present. If you click that, you can then go based on the state. California counties, of course, we're gonna put Riverside County because I'm from Riverside County. And whatever city, right? We can go to Moreno Valley because that's where I grew up. And it'll tell you all the papers that they have information for.
Can you repeat the website? Because I can't read it.
Chronicling America.
Chronicling.
On the
Yeah,
library.
and even if
On the
right, and
oh,
even if you
on the
miss,
library.
yeah, Library of Congress, and even if you spell it wrong, Google will be like, no, baby, you need another O. It'll tell you that. I always feel like Google's like an older Black woman. I don't know, like a grandma when she corrects you. But yeah, you can click the links and it'll tell you when it operated, where the place of publication, where it covered, the publisher, and then you can even see holdings of who has it. Riverside County Library System has those. Riverside Public Library has those. And you can do this for all across the country. And then of course they have all their digitized papers that they have available too. Right, great, thank you, Ms. Lorene. Ms. Lorene says that UCR has a digital newspaper site as well, as a resource for newspapers. Sometimes you will find duplications in these things because people got national digitization project grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So sometimes you do see crossover in order, you know, the funding was used to help digitize. So they have them here and then they might have them elsewhere, or it might be separate collections. But don't forget about UCR.
I have a question.
You have another question?
Do you have any suggestions on how to find information on cemeteries? That part, well, really, I know my mother was buried, I was there, but I can't find, I mean, I was there, I can't find.
I'm like, you're not there, you're here, but yes, I get what you're saying, right.
But she was buried at Union Baptist Cemetery, but that was mainly for Black people to be buried at that cemetery.
Correct.
But we can't find any records, and I did find a grave. I tried that, and I even tried calling Cincinnati, Ohio, trying to find out how do you find out about these cemeteries that are no longer active. I guess they're not burying people. Any suggestions how to maneuver that? Because we were just trying to find the grave, and her mother and grandmother were all buried there, but we can't find them.
Do you guys have her death certificate?
I do, yes, for my mother.
Okay, for your mother, right. So if she's buried there and you know that her mother and other family members are buried there, that would be the first place I would check, would be the cemetery listed on the death certificate. The thing about Find a Grave, I'm sorry?
Oh, they're not in service anymore. You can't contact them. It's no longer.
Okay, I understand that. But what I'm saying is if you're trying to find a cemetery and you don't have a name, a place that you can get the name is her death certificate.
Yeah, I got that. Okay.
And if they're not in operation anymore, one of the things that you could do is, depending on the county that the cemetery would have been in, you can then do sort of a reverse deed search to find out who owned the land, because in most locations, they don't tax the land because it's a cemetery. And usually there's at some point, someone deeded it to a mutual aid society, or, because well, goodness gracious, there's a lot of history with this. It may be a church. They deeded it to a church. They deeded it to a mutual relief aid society, the Knights of Tabor, things like that, right? And folks may have left the area. This is happening all over the country, especially in the Deep South. Everyone, great migrations out. The one person who was cutting the grass dies. Their children don't take up the helm, and then it becomes overgrown. And so what I would do is I would pull the name off of her obituary or her death certificate. If there's no one there to who can tell you where it is, I would find a Black mortuary. If you can find the oldest Black one, and find somebody who's been working there for a long time. because they're the people that know where these cemeteries are, even the small ones that nobody uses anymore. And the other thing you could do is you could, if it's in a major city like Cincinnati, they're gonna have plat maps of each township that they're gonna, even old ones, where they're gonna map out where all the cemeteries were. So then if you could look at the deeds to see, you know, cemetery, you know, XYZ Cemetery Corporation, whatever it is, you can find out where the township, the range, and the section is, and then you can actually get to it on Google Maps. Another resource would be the US Geological Survey. My mom used to always tell me, you need to have their job, you know, where the people are out surveying with the cameras, they make a lot of money. That's what she used to tell me every time we passed by them. But they're out there for a reason. They're mapping features. And they have a whole system where they have all these places, more than 2 million of them that exist across the country and in our territories, where they identify where cemeteries and old towns and post offices and stuff are. And so I would, once you get the name, I would search that service for the USGS to see if it's there too. Yeah, it's not a lost cause. I mean, it being in a major city is a big deal, but beyond getting the name from the death certificate, call one of those old, I'm telling you, call that mortuary that they might not even have a website. And you want to speak to old, you know, Mr. So-and-so who've been working there for 50 years. And, you know, you want to speak to that person because they're the ones that know where all those old cemeteries are.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
The bodies are buried. We have another question.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this, but anyway, here's my last question. You brought up something where it really surprised me. You used the word digital humanities, and only recently one of my kids added a digital humanities minor to their degree. Now, I had never even heard of this. And you know how they're so active, they're doing so much, they don't tell you everything. So I was very intrigued by that, and I saw that it was with Chronicling America. You even used the word, you even used the word grant. So any way you can give me another 3 minutes on that topic?
She's like, I want to know what the heck my kid is doing.
Right.
So yeah, so she's like, what am I paying for? So digital humanities are a big deal right now because, and I think it's been even more exacerbated by the pandemic, right? Look at the space we're in right now. We've got a group of people meeting online. We've got a group of people within the room, and learning has finally hit the stride that it's needed to hit, or that only a certain segment of the population has been able to access it. So when you have digital humanities projects, these are things where people are taking things that you can only see in person, and they are scanning them, they're taking photos of it, they're creating sort of like exhibits that exist in the physical space as well as in the digital space. They're also transferring these things to things like virtual reality, where in fact, one of my friends did this incredible installation at the Rosa Parks Museum where she made all of these gowns and things with her hands, and she had photos and pictures that she took. And you could do a virtual reality tour of her exhibit. That was like a component of her exhibit that she had. So the digital humanities can be that. It could be a library digitizing their collections and making them more searchable with regard to enslaved people. Another great example of digital humanities would be informationwanted.org. What is that? People don't realize that Black people who were enslaved placed ads in newspapers across the country to find their friends and relatives who have been sold away after slavery ended. So this is a digital humanities project where normally you can find out who contributed the money, who gave them the cash. That's always at the bottom, okay? Villanova, National Archives, Pennsylvania Abolition Society, Lenore Kephart, Distinguished Historians Lecture Series Fund, Albert LePage Center for Humanity, or Center for History and Public Interest, the Shredder Emerging Faculty Scholars. What are they doing on here? This is a project where they're taking those ads that were read across the pulpit on Sundays at church. There were Christian newspapers that would print them for free And the pastor or whoever would get up and read the ads during the church service to hope that folks will find their family members. So they took them from the paper format or the microfilm format or the digitized format, and they put them online and made them in a capacity where you can search them by name and location. This is what digital informationwanted.org. You can spend hours, informationwanted.org. You can spend hours on this, hours. You can see the newspapers that contributed to it. Again, because the slant has never been to be sort of equal in terms of coverage, there's so many grants that are going out. Look at all the states: Alabama, Arkansas, California. What? 38 ads placed in San Francisco. Here's this man searching for his wife and children. What do the humanities do? They have volunteers come in and transcribe the words to make it searchable. Hiram Bigsby, a resident of Napa County, wishes to obtain information of his wife called Patsy Stokes, or of his children, Margaret, Amos, and Hisam, or probably Hiram Jr. When last heard from, they were residing in Pulaski County, Missouri. They can hear from their father and husband and receive substantial aid and comfort by addressing P.A. Bell, editor of The Elevator, which is this newspaper in San Francisco, or William V.C., Helena Napa, right? And they put that in there, and you can download these. They also have the ad mapped, where they have the person who wrote it, where they were, and where the people were last seen. This is what digital humanities is doing.
Can I add something? Sure. There's a book, it's fiction, it's called The Book of Lost Friends. And it's about that very, those ads and
Right.
it kind of goes back and forth between the Civil War time and post-Civil War and then more modern days.
Ashley Sack.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're not wasting your money.
I feel better. I understand what's going on.
If all hearts and minds are clear, you guys got lots of stuff to do.
I want, Nicka, can you share with everyone about your trip with cousin Jean? Oh, mention Jean too, because she's important to kind of this conversation as well. But going to Cameroon?
Yeah, so the Jean she's talking about, which there are technically 3, one's male, which is Arthur's brother. We go and do research trips, so it's multi-generational. So I'm one of the younger ones, and then we have a couple retirees, and we all meet to go and do research in Louisiana and Mississippi. And we've probably been to about 14 different courthouses on the Delta alone. We started doing it in 2006, 2007. And after we did one of the more recent trips, we got the opportunity to travel to Cameroon because our direct ancestor, King, who you guys saw in the inventory of enslaved people, his DNA traced back to Cameroon. So we were able to take 2 different trips to Cameroon in 2010 and 2011, where we got to go back to where our ancestors were from. And we also were given land in Cameroon when we were there. The second trip we took, ironically, it's so funny. Did anybody watch Abbott Elementary?
Yes.
On ABC? Okay, so the second trip we took with Cheryl Lee Ralph was on that trip. So it's so odd for me to see her back on TV when we all did that. It was so strange because she wasn't really doing stuff back then. But yeah, so Jean and herself is a whole story. You should just invite her for story time, Tracy. She is one of three sisters who were founding members of the Congress of Racial Equality chapter in New Orleans, and they desegregated the city. It's a very unknown part of the civil rights movement, because generally when you talk about the civil rights movement, people will isolate it to Atlanta or even Nashville, but they completely erase the role of New Orleans. In fact, the national branch of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, would basically come and pluck all of them out to train people in other places to do things. So Jean and her sisters, Jean was on the first Freedom Ride that made it to its destination without people being injured. If you recall, there was a bus that was burned in Anniston and people were beat up in Montgomery, but they went from Montgomery to Jackson, Mississippi. On her ride were people like C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette. In fact, David Dennis, him and his son are coming out with a book. David Dennis Sr. was over Freedom Summer in the state of Mississippi, and he was from the New Orleans Core chapter. Her sister, 2 weeks later, just graduated from high school, was on a ride where she was the only girl or only woman on the ride, and she ended up at Parchman Prison as an 18-year-old. They did Freedom Summer in Louisiana and Mississippi. They also did Freedom Highways, which a lot of people don't know about, where that was the second phase of the Freedom Rides, where they moved to interstate hotels and things like Howard Johnson's and stuff. And again, it's an incredible story. So that's one of my many projects that I have to work on, is getting the story out about how New Orleans was central to the civil rights movement, and most people don't know it. Yep.
Any more questions for Nicka?
We'll be here next month.
Oh, yes. I has agreed to be here in person in June. And that program will be about Juneteenth. And so we do have a date for that. I believe it's the 19th or the 18th. So, we'll make sure to let everybody know. Now Nicka has a friend who does genealogy, who's a librarian at Cal State Fullerton. Colleen Green, and we've been in touch with each other. And she also does presentations at conferences on Hispanic genealogy. So we'll probably have her as a guest as well. And then cousin Jean, I really would like to have her come and share her experience. I know you don't have the film footage, but whenever I get a chance to show people of her getting off the Trailways bus in Mississippi, people are, especially kids, they're just, this like happened not too long ago. Like, yes, literally did not happen that long ago. And I mean, I'm so proud to have found Nicka and just connect with our family. This family's like amazing, just the things that they've contributed in the entertainment business, in politics, just all over the map. And I mean, I'm really proud of the things that she's accomplished. I forgot to mention, she did interview Regina King on Who You Think You Are. And can we go back and see that? Is that on Hulu?
Yeah, it's actually been airing. I don't know what they're doing on like the next season, because I'm on another episode, just hasn't come out yet. And I can't tell you who it is, but just know that I had so much fun. Oh my gosh, we cut up. I'm sure none of the cutting up is in the episode, but we cut up on that episode. Yeah. Oh, it's when you see it, it'll make sense when you hear me say we cut up. So yeah. But you can catch. Normally, they've been re-airing episodes, and I think it might be on Hulu. It probably is. 9 times out of 10, it probably is on Hulu.
I want to thank you for setting this up and making this wonderful connection.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. I know, it's just, and now we were fortunate to buy some new books on genealogy, which I have some of them on display, which are available to check out. So you're welcome to check those out if you would like. And also, like I said, the free resources that we just got in December, I really pushed for those, and our director said, sure, you do that part. You work with the rep, and we got them, really quick in December. So I'll try and push those out a little bit more, and hopefully we'll have some workshops on how to use newspapers.com, how to use Threefold, whatever topic is of interest, we'll tackle it. Maybe bring Nicka on board with us and get a little bit more professional insight. So I'm constantly on Ancestry, and so every now and then I'll text her, hey, what about this person? Where'd you find that person from? So I really appreciate her professionalism. She's also a professional photographer. She does weddings. She did my wedding. Hey, just all around good person. Yes. So if there's any more questions? Anybody on the chat?
Oh, one more thing. Yeah. Jeffrey in the chat asked if I was going to be at Roots Tech. Just so you guys know, Family Search has a genealogy conference they put on yearly. In the last year or two, I don't think it's going back to in person ever because they got way more people there virtually. It's called Roots Tech. It's free, and they have classes. They have way more offerings now that they're not, hampered in by like conference room space. So register for that. It's taking place the first week of March. And it's genealogy from all over. Even I find stuff that I watch that I'm learning, Caribbean research. That's an area that a lot of us here stateside are not so much well-versed, but you have to remember it was a triangular trade. And a lot of times ancestors will be taken to the Caribbean and maybe have families there or, and brought stateside. So there's pretty much anything you can think of is happening at Roots Tech. And I will be speaking at Roots Tech, spoke there last year, spoke the last few years. So you'll see me doing presentations there. And then me and Krista are doing are we doing it as a Facebook or Instagram? I can't remember. We're supposed to be doing a live from Roots Tech on, I think it's like March 3rd. We're supposed to be doing that. And me and Krista Cowan, if you follow any of Ancestry social media, that's my cousin too. We found out we were related. So yeah, so she's a cousin. We actually know how.
Is the Southern California Genealogical Society Conference going to be virtual or in person this year?
It's virtual. It's virtual again. Yep. And I'll be speaking there too.
Okay, so that conference is usually in Burbank. I have a fellow colleague here who's the manager from the Upland Library, who's like fangirl of Nicka.
Yes, that's why I'm here. Sorry.
And so we go to that conference. Nicka is a very popular presenter at that conference. So that's another one that's virtual.
What's the name of it?
The Southern California Genealogical Society. So, there's so much out there. I'm just privileged to have, the resource that I have in my family. There's always somebody in the family who's a family historian. So do not throw away a family Bible. Don't do it because it has more information than you probably think. The handwriting might be hard to read, but you usually can pick stuff out that's really helpful. Well, I had a patron at a library I worked at before, and the Friends of the Library got this family Bible. They were going to throw it away. And I said, oh, no, no, do not throw this away. It was very well documented. This family lived in Missouri. I was able to track that family down. Ironically, the family matriarch is a retired librarian. How's this come over to California? And I was able to send it back to her. And and that just, it was just kind of navigating, contacting the library. Oh yeah, we know that family. They've been here for years. There were names in that Bible that they weren't even familiar with. And so I took a lot of the research out of what they had to do was already done. So, there's, things that, families think that when somebody passes away to throw away, it's probably a treasure that you want to keep. At least that's what I found. Yeah.
You like hoarders.
Yes, that's a librarian thing too, right?
I don't want to talk about it.
I want to thank all the people virtually who joined us. I will send out the recording to everybody who registered, so everybody will get a copy. And those of you who are present, if you haven't put down your email address, please do, and I'll email that as well, and any updated upcoming programs that we do. Again, I want to thank the Friends of the Library who sponsored this event today. 3 members are here, including the president and the secretary, and Wendy, who's also here from the Friends. We're doing an event with her next month. She's written a book. So that will be our next event on March 19th. So any last questions before Nicka goes?
You said something about the library in Iowa?
Oh, no, the manager from the Upland Library is here. She drove down today. And
Because I'm very into everything she says.
so yeah, I'm constantly forwarding things that Nicka does to Shannon. And so the Mountain people, you guys have a genealogical group at the library there as well. So the Mountain people are, you know, they're doing their thing too. Yes.
I'll share something with you.
Sure.
I'm not from California. My cousin's from California. We are cousins. She contacted me through ancestry.com. We had never met before.
Wow. I just got chills. Nicka, did you hear that?
Grandmother and my dad were half siblings.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I have chills for real right now. Okay, I'm gonna top that one. I went to a funeral for my father-in-law earlier this week. And a cousin that I know on Facebook came to the funeral because she worked with my father-in-law. So it was very awkward to go up and introduce myself. Hey, Kim, you know we're cousins?
Oh, it was Kim. It was Kim.
And she just looked at me
What
like,
was that?
what? And then
Right, right. And then she made a
Yeah,
connection. That's hilarious.
yeah, and she just kind of looked at me like, what is going on? She had her mask on, so I couldn't really see her expression. And she said, how? I said, Atlas? And she's like, what? And so here we are viewing this body in the mortuary. And so she was.
It's all about family.
I mean, hey, you know, I couldn't pass up the opportunity when I saw her walk in. I forgot to tell you about that. But wow,
That
was
is hilarious, but that is so on brand with us though. Like always. Arthur knows, like people meet each other in the line at the pharmacy. Like that was like that's my favorite story. Is like one of our cousins was mad because one of her prescriptions wasn't covered by her insurer. And she's like all upset. And there's a cousin standing behind her who worked for her employer's HR department in the benefits area. And she heard her last name and it's like, oh, you're related to me. Wait a minute, call this in here like blah. I said, are you kidding me? And they both called me like, yeah, I met her at the line at the pharmacy. She helped me with my prescription. That literally happened.
It's a very small world.
Wow. Yes.
Right.
My sister and I did our DNA, and we found out we had to have sister. And this, we just found it.
Oh.
Because we did
Have you
it
met her
maybe a
yet?
year ago.
Have you met her yet?
We talked, we've done FaceTime, and no, whatever one things are.
Yeah.
We did that, but we haven't seen her in person because of COVID. She lives in Georgia.
Wow.
So that was interesting to find out at the age of 67 that we had a half sibling and took my spot. I was younger, so she was younger than me. I said, she took my spot.
Sure, we have one more last question.
Speaking of DNA companies, do you have a preference, or should you do them all, or will they have different information?
That's a good question.
It depends on what you're looking for. If you are somebody who's an adoptee and you're trying to find your family and you don't have any other clues, then I suggest testing at the major companies, all of them, if you can afford to. And if cost is an issue, then usually wait until Christmas or like one of the holidays. They usually have a sale and you can get the kits for half off. But if you're just really purely doing it for genealogy reasons, I always tell people to go with Ancestry because there's more people tested there than any other site. And because you get the family trees of your DNA matches. The other sites like MyHeritage, they offer that, but they just don't have the large number of people tested. So with our family, right now, it's probably like 75% of the people are on Ancestry and the other 25 are on 23andMe. But you know, people laugh, like literally we had a cousin, I was like, your dad's not your dad. I know your dad's not your dad. They're like, how do you know? Because look at all these atlases. You don't have all these atlases unless your dad comes from, your dad's got to be an atlas. And I was able to narrow it down. That sounds so crazy. It took me about 10 minutes and I found out who his father was just because we have so many people tested. And Tracy, that was only off of 20 centimorgans. That's all it took. Siblings share, right? Siblings share what, like 1,500? And I was able to figure it out of 20 because we have so many family members tested.
What? That's amazing.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So,
Well, thank
yeah.
you, Nicka.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
we will see you in June in person.
Yes.
And then we, like I mentioned when we first started, we have a family reunion in July in New Orleans, so we know how to do it. Allison, so, oh yeah, we're cousins.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to, are you going to? Okay, we'll be there. We'll be there. We'll be happy and have a good time in New Orleans. And thank you everybody again for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye, Nicka.
Bye-bye.
Yes.